Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the Cohasset Planning Board meeting, Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. The time is now 6:31 p.m. and this meeting is being convened via Zoom. My name is Amy Glassmeyer and I'm the current chair of the Cohasset Planning Board. I will now call the meeting to order, beginning with roll call. Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Clark Brewer.
Here.
Tom Callahan.
Here.
Paul Caleri. Paul Grady.
Present.
Eric Potter. All right, thank you. I will now introduce our planning director, Ms. Lauren Lind, who will be joined by Ms. Jen Oram, who is the Assistant Director of Planning, Permitting, and Zoning Boards, and Ms. Angela Gisio, who is the Administrative Assistant in the Building Department and who will be taking notes for us tonight. I would also like to introduce our legal counsel, Ms. Carolyn Murray of KP Law. She is a land use lawyer and has served many communities in Massachusetts related to local government and land use law, and she'll be providing us legal counsel this evening. I will now turn to Ms. Lynn to explain how the public can participate in the meeting.
Thank you. In this webinar style meeting, we disable the chat function. What we use is the question and answer function, and we ask that you put your name and address in there. You can leave written comments or just indicate that you'd like to speak to a particular item on the agenda. We do have one public hearing later on in the evening, and there will be a designated public comment period during that time. Anytime that we do promote you to speak to the board, we ask that you try to keep your comments under 3 minutes maximum, try not to be repetitive, and you do need to state your name and address for the record first before you begin speaking. So thank you. I'll turn it back to the chair.
All right, thank you. I'd like to make a few additional introductory comments. Statements and questions should be directed to the chair. That means me, who will ask the appropriate person to respond. That means planning board members. Discussion during the meeting should always be courteous and respectful and should be confined to the subject under consideration. So we want to stay on task and get to the point. Board members that have the appearance of a conflict of interest will recuse themselves during the discussion of issues of a financial nature. So with that, tonight's planning board agenda includes 4 items of business. We're going to begin with an update on the comprehensive zoning rewrite RFQ process and vote to assign planning board members to the RFQ review group. Ms. Lind will tee up the issue, and then Ms. Katie Dugan will discuss the RFQ process.
Thank you very much and welcome, and thank you, Katie, for joining us. So what we're doing, this topic had come before the planning board in joint session with select board on November 8th, along with several of the other land use boards, and this is talking about the comprehensive zoning rewrite. We also at town meeting last night, that was part of, I believe, Article 4 to fund a portion of the zoning rewrite. What we're working on right now is a request for qualifications process that'll go out for bid. We're timing in January and leading into early spring so that we can request not proposals, but qualifications from different firms that specialize in zoning and do engagement and things like that. So tonight, Katie will walk through the RFQ, and there's a couple of items that I think the planning board may want to comment on, they may not want to, and then ultimately we will ask for participation for, I believe it's 2 members that we're looking for to sit on the review committee for the items that come in, which does require a big time commitment, and we'll get more into that later. So without further ado, I will turn it to Katie to give us some more detail about this process.
And let me introduce Ms. Dugan. Ms. Dugan is the chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee and will be working with us on the RFQ.
Great, thank you guys. Lauren, do you mind promoting Cassie Malatesta, who's also on the zoning bylaw working group and has been working with me on putting together this RFQ. So the 3 goals: input on the RFQ, appoint 2 members of the planning board to the interview committee. And we did circulate a list of potential zoning consultants that Cassie actually worked on, just to give us a sense of what the marketplace of consultants looks like. So if there is a willingness, I'd love to show you that list quickly to see if there's any comments from your group as to whether there's anybody missing or anybody that you would like for us to highlight, but that's the only other agenda item. So let me see if I have the ability to share. I do. All right, so I've got the RFQ up, and you guys were distributed this last Friday, so hopefully you've had a little time to review. It's a document that myself, Cassie Malatesta, who's on the zoning bylaw working group, that the master plan implementation committee charged to work on zoning. Lauren and Michelle Leary from procurement have been working on this jointly. The document sort of is based on previous RFQs that the town has sent out for bid, including the master plan one that Clark worked with me on. We also looked at a couple different models from Arlington and Bedford, as they have done RFQs for zoning consultants in the last 5 years. And so there were some good ideas there in terms of language. I think in terms of the key parts of the document, I'm happy to go through it page by page. But I think my recommendation, unless the board has other ideas, is to really focus on two sections. One, just the timetable so that everybody's up to speed on that. And then section 4, which is the project overview, scope, and work deliverables. So I'm going to ask the board if that would be to their liking.
Yes, please.
Clark, that's reasonable?
Yes, that
Okay,
sounds
great.
reasonable.
Okay. All right. So the RFQ timeline, some of this you've heard before, but just that everybody remembers. The reason we're reviewing it this week is that we can kind of incorporate your comments, select board's comments, and put it to bed, hopefully, so we can all enjoy the holidays. And then we'll obviously finalize it the first week after New Year's, but we agreed with Michelle Leary that we're actually going to make the package available for and go out to bid on January 10th. Michelle Leary will have to do mandatory 30B advertising prior to that, which I think begins at the end of December. But she's already got that all mapped up. So the idea is the bids will go out on the 10th. It is typical to have a pre-proposal conference via Zoom where any prospective bidder is able to ask questions of the town. And so Michelle Leary will host that. Members of the planning board, the zoning bylaw working group can attend, but generally what happens is the questions are asked and then all responses are actually generated by the town and sent out to every bidder that has indicated interest in the process, so that all bidders have the same information. So we answer the questions. And then the bids are actually due a month later on Thursday, February 10th. And because we now have Zoom as a platform, Michelle is actually taking the practice of opening all of those bids via Zoom. So there will be a bid opening that's open to the public, so everybody knows who has bid and how many have bid. So that'll be public on the 10th. And then from there, the interview committee takes over. For a couple weeks. We'll talk a little bit about the interview committee, but this is just a group that is formed for the purposes of reviewing the request for qualifications only. It'll include 2 members of the planning board, 2 members of the zoning bylaw working group, 1 member of select board, and the 3 members from town. And the interview committee will use the matrix that's actually in section, I think 5, to review the bids and rank the proposals that come in from prospective consultants. They will do that independently. And then the week of the 21st, they will actually meet as an interview committee via Zoom to review their rankings and select the finalists. Typically there's 3 finalists. And then we're proposing on Tuesday, March 1st, that same interview committee will interview all of the finalists. I think the way we did it for master plans, we interviewed 1 at 5, 1 at 6, and 1 at 7. And based on those interviews, the finalists will be again ranked using a matrix that's in section 5, and a consultant will be selected by the town. This is assuming that we like what we see in terms of the consultants that come in, the solutions that they're proposing, and their qualifications. if that works out, we'll hopefully execute a contract, which is the obligation of the town and Michelle Leary. The only thing I will say is that because we have chosen an RFQ process, that means that when the bids come in, there's going to be two envelopes. There's going to be an envelope with the actual bid quantity, the dollar amount that they're proposing for the project. And then there's going to be an RFQ, which answers all of our questions around scope. And in that process, that's what we actually review first. So the interview committee is not going to have access to the pricing until we select the finalists. And at that point, we negotiate with the finalist for the final amount of the executed contract. So that is a negotiated process, but the RFQ process allows you to focus on qualifications instead of having to go with the lowest bidder, which in our situation, given we're looking for a specific set of services, is not the right solution. And then the goal would be to have a kickoff meeting with the consultant by the end of March, focus on public forums and community engagement over the spring and summer of 2022. Have a written comment period for the community on specific zoning bylaw language in the fall. Have additional public forums in the fall and winter leading up to what would be a set of 40A public hearings in February and March of 2023 in advance of annual town meeting 2023. So that's what we've listed out as a timetable. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or comments from the planning board.
It seems like an excellent outline for getting a good consultant on board.
And I like the fact that we've got sort of 2 rounds of public forums or public engagement in here, because I think we're going to do some initial work around more conceptual things. And then once we have more and more fine-tuned language, we can go back to the community, both in a written comment period, but also in public forums to really make sure that everyone understands this and engaged in what the proposal says. And hopefully that will enhance the process because that will get more public engagement prior to the 48 public hearings, which we know we have to do, but have been really the focus of a lot of the public comments to date. So hopefully this will improve the process. Let's leave it at that.
Ms. Dugan, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Thank you. Then I'll go to Clark and then I'll go to Mr. Grady. This is not inclusive of the communications strategy that we have spoken about requiring as part of the process, is it?
So, so in that public engagement, we do envision communications. And in fact, at the select board meeting last night, their single comment was that we needed to add a more explicit section in the scope of services, which described that outbound communication expectation. And so in what you're reviewing tonight, that's not there,
Okay.
but we got clear direction from the select board that we needed to be more explicit. When we wrote this timeline and envisioned the process, that outbound communication was clearly part of it, but we were not as explicit as I think the select board wanted us to be on that point. So that was heard and will be reflected. And obviously whatever language we draft will be available and we'll circulate it to both the select board and the planning board for further comment. The only other thing I would say just is that if the good news about the RFQ is we send it out, we have the ability to amend it. So if we're getting questions or we don't like the bids that we're getting, we have the ability to amend this to further fine tune our expectations, but obviously you want to get as much of it right up front, but it's not like what we send out on the 10th cannot be revised because you can.
Great, that's good to hear. Mr. Brewer?
Yeah, so with the second to the last, the planning board 48 public hearings,
Yeah.
I'll assume that at that point we have a draft updated zoning bylaw.
Yes.
Is there a step? I mean, you've got additional public forums. Would we have a draft zoning bylaw? Because what I'm getting at is it is important to, I think, to get some vetting on both the municipal side with the boards and the building inspector and a variety of other municipal kind of perspective. As well as potential applicants kind of being able to review the language together to see how it may mean different things to different people ahead of our planning board public hearings. And I guess that could fit into additional public forums. But to me, it's more of like a like kind of a rugby scrum where you really look at what the concepts that we have from the master plan, that how they get worked through in terms of the details, and whether the execution of those concepts in the language of the bylaw, whether that's working the way it's intended. So a rigorous testing mechanism during that period between written comment period and additional public forum, I think would be great.
I think the intent, and I think you've pointed out a good thing, Clark, which is the intent was that for the written comment period, there would actually be bylaw language that people would be commenting on. In our discussions, those additional public forums would be on specific draft bylaw language. So if it helps clarify the point, I think I changed that third to last line to say additional public forums on draft bylaw language.
Great.
Is that, and again, I think at that point, if we don't have draft bylaw language, we're not going to be ready for May, you know?
Right, but the important thing I think that you're saying is that it's before the public hearings process that we kick it around.
Yeah,
Right.
no, what I'm suggesting is that this step right here is not conceptual. It is like draft bylaw language that the public forums are focused on. In fact, one of the draft RFQs that I read, they had, I don't know what they call them, like social hours where people could come in and ask questions on draft language. So the intent there, and I think what I'll do is I'll just insert the words on draft bylaw language to clarify that the public forums in that second scenario are much more focused leading up to the 48 public hearings.
All right,
That's
thank
great.
you. Mr. Grady?
Mine's brief. I just want to first say to Katie and the whole zoning bylaw group, you guys did a fantastic job. I can only say I'm sorry that it's come to this. You had so many layers, and now we're having layer upon layer added to it again, even though you're coming up with this proposal. You know, my view, it's a heck of a law, and I just wanted to tell you guys, I thought you did a fantastic job. I was looking forward to passage, and I'm sorry that again, some impediments were thrown in front of it, be it for conflict of interest or any other way, or self-serving motives.
Oh, what are you talking about?
I'm just talking about everybody at the meeting, Clark.
Are you talking about town
Okay,
meeting?
hey, let's stay on task here. I'm going to go through the planning board members. I'm going to ask Eric Potter if he has any comments.
So thank you, Katie, and thank you, Cassie, and
Paul.
thank you, your group.
I appreciate it. I will let folks know. And we're here because
Thank
we
you.
want this consultant to be brought on board. So this is something we've been asking for 6 months, and we got the funding on. So I view the funding in Article 4 that we got for this consultant as a huge success, and it's going to be helpful. So we're looking forward to doing this.
Great. So I want to just let Eric and Tom, if they have any comments, to make them now. Mr. Potter?
Yeah, so I'll be brief as well, but I think the reason for my changing of my opinion on whether or not to move forward with the article, some of the bylaws last night, hold on one second, it's just gonna be very quick, was because I wasn't really aware of, I don't think I really internalized the fact that we're gonna be going through such a comprehensive process here. And I think this is fantastic to see these dates in front of us, because it really gives us an idea of the process that's gonna take place moving forward. And I think getting this, going through the steps, while it will take longer, will definitely, at the end product, is going to be something that I think the public's going to be a lot more willing to tackle and engage and hopefully accept. So I am very impressed with all the work that's been done by the Zoning Working Bylaw Committee, but I do think that with such a comprehensive rewrite that's going to happen here, this does make a lot of sense to go through these formal steps, as tedious as they will be, because at the end of the day, you're not going to have the reaction I don't think that you had last night with particular bylaw changes, because there's going to be a lot more community involvement, awareness, and really, that's, I think, the long-term goal here is to get something in place, even if it's 2 years from now, that's going to really benefit us for the next generation to come.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Potter. Mr. Callahan, would you like to comment?
Oh, I think this RFQ is fine, very well done. To Clark's comment, as someone who is involved in writing the bylaw and expects to be involved in the rewrite, I can assure you that sections of the bylaw will be out.
Someone must have something open. Their mic. Everybody close their mic down if you're not speaking. Thank you.
Anyway, I can assure you that sections of the bylaw will be available as they're being written.
All right, thank you. Ms. Lind, what do we do next? And Katie, what do we do next? We're going to go through the list of the possible applicants.
Just want to, and I don't want to belabor it, but just the project scope was the only other section that I think is worth reviewing just super briefly. So there's just a couple concepts. We don't have to go through all the language. The first concept is that the bylaws themselves, there's a lot, as we've talked about, it's been 35 years since the last zoning update. When we did the benchmarking and we came to you at the beginning of the December, and we've known this as a working group, but we brought it to you formally on December 1st, the vast majority of communities phase their projects, just because if you do everything all at once, it can be a 4-year project. So we have broken this down into a phase 1 and phase 2. And we've asked that in the RFQ that the consultants comment and recommend best practices relative to timeline. So I think one of the great things about going through this 30B process is the zoning bylaw working group, the planning board, and the community are going to get recommendations from consultants that do this all the time as to what is the best practice. The best practice that we observed is that it's generally phased into 2 big chunks, a phase 1 and a phase 2. The phase 1 and phase 2 are going to be clearly defined and known by the community. This isn't going to be a mystery as to what phase 1 and phase 2 are. What we've outlined here in the RFQ is that phase 1 will definitely include the super sexy reorganization and reformatting, but it's important stuff. And that will include improving definitions, rearranging sections, bringing references up to date, adding really great infographics, diagrams, and visuals to clarify things, modernizing and reformatting. That is going to be in phase 1. In phase 1 and phase 2, that's where we get into more of the substantive changes. And since there were 20 recommendations in the goals and strategies, realistically, in 15 months, we're not going to be able to chunk off all of that substantive content. And so the recommendation is that we do a chunk of it in phase 1, but then deliberately leave another chunk of it in phase 2. And that's what we're looking in part for recommendations from consultants as to how best to tackle this. So I wanted to be clear that majority of communities do this in a phased process. The communities that don't take 4 or 5 years to redo their zoning bylaws. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure. I've got my working group behind me for a 4-year project right now. So we've broken it down into a 15-month project, and then we'll define up front what phase 2 is. And hopefully I'll have the team behind me for the second phase. So that's point number 1.
While you have that screen up.
Yeah.
So the E-code format is what we signed on for. So are you saying that the consultant will use the E-code format, or will there be, is it possible to have a separate format? Because I've been working with the Falmouth zoning bylaw recently, and they had sort of an antiquated version of E-code that they used, but their new bylaw is it's a book, it's chapters, as opposed to the E-code format. Is it possible to have both?
It is actually, and I can show you on E-code how you can actually download a PDF of the complete bylaws.
Okay, I know.
Okay,
I know how
I'm sorry,
to do that,
I didn't.
I was wondering though, because the Falmouth, the new zoning bylaw, it looks good. The organization of it is nested. The words can be put in bold that needed. Things can be highlighted. You know, there's an
Oh, I see what you're saying.
organizational system
Yeah.
of information that just helps anyone using it on a daily basis. I mean, for every meeting, I always have my zoning bylaw right there, and it's okay,
Yeah.
but it's not great.
No,
And
I'm sorry. I misunderstood the question, Clark, and we actually had a conversation with Bob Mitchell, who is a consultant that you guys had, and he actually assured us that E-code can do more than most towns know. And so the hope would be that our E-code is more user-friendly in the end than what we have right now.
Okay, Bob Mitchell is one of the guys that worked on Falmouth.
Yes.
And I mean, their new version, I don't know if it's been adopted at town meeting yet, but their new version it's excellent. It's easy to use, easy to read, and
Yeah.
it's way better. They actually hadn't graded since 1979. So like we're 5 years ahead.
Good to know.
Yay, us. No, I think Falmouth actually just adopted theirs in like 20 or 21. And Bob, when we were speaking to him, he was assuring us that E-code actually allows you to do diagrams and all of that formatting stuff that allows it to be more user-friendly. It's just that a lot of people, I don't know whether they didn't know how to do it, but yes, the answer is yes to your question.
Or didn't buy that option. All right, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
If I could just add,
terrific.
I do know that E-code has add-ons, tech-based things that you can add to have more functionality. And so if we don't already have access to it, it's something that we can look into. But at this time, I would say that there's no plan to have 2 different platforms available.
Just the electronic one that you can turn into a PDF and it is.
Right,
what
or
it
you
is.
can always purchase copies from the town clerk's office. That's always an option, even today, but you know, if you wanted a hard paper copy.
Oh, okay. Well, then
Okay, so
we'll
let
see
me,
what it can do.
okay, so let's, Mr. Callahan, would you like to make a comment, or should we move on to the list?
Okay. So the only other thing I wanted to comment in terms of scope of services. So there's basically two, now 3, based on the select board comments, services. So service number 1 that we're looking for is public participation. And that's something that we all agree needs to happen. And so what we've asked for is their best recommendations as it relates to public participation and engagement. And we've listed out here on, I don't even know what page I'm on, page 12, examples of what that kind of public engagement could be. We had a discussion as a working group that we didn't want to be prescriptive, but rather suggest, because part of what we're looking for in these RFQs is to see what the consultants are going to recommend, what their ideas are, and get a sense of how good are they at public engagement, because that is kind of a critical piece of why we're hiring this consultant. The second piece that we're going to add based on select board feedback is a section between A and B, which will talk about communication services. And this is where we're going to get into the outbound communications to residents, to other committees, so that we ensure that in addition to kind of the public engagement work, there's a steady drip of communication around what is happening. And that's just, as we've all talked about, something that the committee that's generally working on the work itself often struggles to find extra committee hours to do that communication stuff. And there's no support currently available from the town because we don't have a communications or any kind of PR function, so that it's either the committee does it or it doesn't get done. And that's why we're looking to add communication services as a piece of the RFP. And then the third piece of the RFP, which this B will become a C, is around the actual redrafting, which is the reorganization and the redraft. I'm sorry. Does somebody have a question?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Continue.
All right. So, and then the third service is reorganization and redraft. The one thing I will say is that the zoning bylaw working group feels comfortable doing a lot of the redraft work ourselves, and in part because the town including the select board, has ensured that we will have ample help and services from our town council, land council at KP Law. So we are going to be relying heavily, not necessarily on the consultant for the writing piece, but rather our town council for the drafting piece. The consultant, as described in this RFP, will be reviewing that language and obviously inputting. They could be very helpful in terms of providing sample language from other communities they've worked with. But we, in our vision here, their first job is public engagement, their second job is communication, and their third job is helping with the reorganization and redraft, and the packaging of that reorganization and redraft. So when we get to expectations here, in terms of final deliverables, there's a lot of stuff that we would like the consultant, based on the final draft, to prepare before the public hearings and before annual town meeting, so that we have presentations, we have a summary that's in plain language of the comprehensive zoning redraft and reorganization. We have a detailed outline. We have an executive summary. We have basically a guide for the community of, like, if on page 4 definitions were here in the old bylaw, they're now in section 6 on page 7. So there's a lot of best practices that we've seen in terms of what the final deliverables are that are produced for a comprehensive rewrite, so the community is completely aware, and so do they choose be able to delve into quite a bit of detail. The only other thing I will put out is that one of the last expectations that we set out for the consultant was that the consultant will actually be required to interact with committees beyond the zoning bylaw working group, and there's going to be an expectation that the consultant will leverage knowledge and reports from the planning board, the select board, the ZBA, Concom, open space, and affordable housing steering committee. So we have that expectation that the consultant will be willing to work with those committees as it is necessary. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any specific comments or concerns about the scope of services.
I think you've done a really good job of summarizing this for us.
Okay.
And I would just ask everyone to ensure that they get a second look at it, because it's been in their box for a week.
Okay. So the plan is that we will reflect the communications language. We're going to do a little bit of proofing to make sure that we've got it as tight as possible, and then we will recirculate a final draft out to the planning board before it obviously goes out to bid. But as I said, you are able to change this if we so choose, or we come up with some information that allows us to change it. So last 2 items are, I just wanted to share quickly, and I'm not going to spend literally any time on this, the list of potential zoning consultants. But again, if the planning board can take a look at this was in your packet. Cassie came up with this, and we asked her to shake the tree in terms of looking at any community that's done a zoning rewrite in the last decade or so. And she did a great job of coming up with 15 consultants. They range in terms of the services, and we recognize that. Actually, one of the things that Cassie and I were talking about today, she's going to organize this list a little bit by the types of services. Some of the consultants are kind of almost purely legal, which probably will not meet our needs. Others are quite full service. And then some are kind of in the middle. So 15 consultants. The reason we generated this list is that because the 30B process requires you to advertise and send it out to bid publicly for anybody to submit a proposal on. But you can actually, in addition to that, send out specific targeted emails from your procurement department inviting consultants to bid. And so our thought process was, since we want to generate as much activity on this as possible, we would use a broad approach in terms of inviting potential consultants. And that was the reason we came up with this list. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or comments. Great. All right. Last but not least is the interview committee. And we talked about this on December 1st, but the interview committee is the interim committee that actually does the review of the RFQ bids when they come in after February 10th. This is what we are actually proposing in terms of the structure of the committee. And again, this is open for discussion. This isn't fixed in stone. There's 3 town employees, John Hallen, Lauren Lind, and Jen Oram. And then we're proposing 5 members from various boards, 2 from the zoning bylaw working group, 2 members from the planning board, and 1 from the select board. The only caveat, and I raised this last time we met, was that anybody that's on the interview committee actually has to participate in the full process. And so what that would require the interview committee member to do is as follows. They would have to be available to review and rank the proposals the week of February 14th to 18th. That's something that you do individually based on the matrix. You'd have to be available to have a meeting via Zoom the week of the 21st to select a finalist. And that is, again, the interview committee comparing their rankings and coming up with the finalists. And then last, on Tuesday, March 1st, participate in likely 3 finalist interviews. Generally, the committee comes up with a list of standardized questions that they're going to use with all candidates, and then they interview the candidates. After following that meeting, they rank the candidates and select the finalist. So if the planning board is ready tonight, we'd be happy to have your nominations for the interview committee. We don't have to have it tonight, but we would have to have it by January.
I didn't get to say that I thought that the list of consultants was excellent, and it had the Falmouth guys as well as our 2004 master plan people in there. I couldn't think of anybody to add, but we still have some time to find people that are doing this and excellent. And I'm happy to volunteer for the interview committee.
Katie, I'd like to be on the interview committee, and I have a number of.
Some of this, people actually leaving their trunks wide open to prevent the issues.
That's
What is
unusual. So I wonder if what we want to do as a planning board.
Back doors wide open to show thieves there's nothing valuable inside.
I'm sorry, Eric, there appears to be some background noise when you're on mute. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. I think rather than, is there anybody else besides myself and Clark who would like to be on the interview committee? Paul Grady?
Yeah, I've got a question. Katie, will these be nighttime things or daytime? I mean, I could break away from the office. I'm fully on board with this, but.
So it would be up to the interview committee to decide when they want to meet. Generally, it's during the day because we need Michelle. Actually, I'm gonna rephrase that. It needs to be during the day because Michelle Leary is the one that runs these meetings, and she doesn't generally work nights. So I would say that the only exception to that is the interview of the finalists may be based on when the finalists are available to meet on the March 1st. But in general, Lauren, did you have a comment?
Yes, just so the review proposals and ranking piece, the first bullet under interview committee, the week of February 14th to 18th, I believe it's that people can look at that on their own time. They don't have to review it together because everyone's going to have their homework to do when we get the submissions. And then the meeting to select the finalists, that would be during the day. The interview, I believe we're planning for the evening.
Okay.
Is it going to be Zoom or is it going to be in person?
I don't think I'm able to answer that yet. I just don't know how things are going.
The select the finalists will likely be via Zoom. I forget. I actually think that the week, let me just check my calendar, because we scheduled this around February break because we knew that that was going to be a problem. I can't. Shoot.
Katie, if you have a list of times that you could send me, I mean, I'd like to get on it, but I don't want to hold up. I don't want to hold up the process, but I do have a handle on some of this stuff. So,
Okay.
Why don't we each write an essay, why we want to be on the interview committee, and then let the selectmen decide
That's a
who
good
writes
one.
the best essay.
Well, I think that, that's not a bad idea, is for those that wish to do it, to actually write your qualification.
Because I actually would think about doing it too. Slower time of year for me at work. It's just something that maybe I could help out a little bit here as well. And with me during the day, it's something to be able to meet wouldn't be as much of a conflict. I don't know that I want to, if everyone else is fully committed tonight, I don't want to get in the way, but if it's not a decision that's made tonight and something to think about,
Well, it's
I
either
would
an
give it strong
essay or
consideration.
rock, paper, scissors.
I can do rock, paper, scissors. I have a secret dynamite cause I use. And
I don't think Katie and I anticipated this level of
Excuse
interest.
me.
Well, how about the
is
chair?
it-
I'm going to throw this out there. How about the chair of the planning board in conjunction with with Katie and the members of the advisory board pick the people that they want on the.
No, so listen, I don't
Yeah,
think we need
really.
to have a decision tonight, but I would say that this is a planning board decision, and we would welcome any.
So I do think the idea of those of us who wish to be on this, it's wonderful to see so many people who want to do it. Just write a small statement of qualifications as to why you want to do it. And then we will discuss this. I think the chair and the vice chair should discuss this and come up with the best possible duo.
So does that be an essay or can I encapsulate it in one sentence?
You can do whatever you want.
All
That
right.
it's totally, there's no requirements, no quality. It's whatever you want to do.
Good. I can wrap it up pretty quick.
Okay, Lauren Lind.
So I'm going to suggest that we put this onto our agenda on 1/5. That way we can still keep on timeline and have someone, 2 people prepared in January. So that would be my recommendation.
So that we would make the decision before the 5th of January.
You will make it on the 5th of January. You
I'll
can
make
vote
it
to
up.
assign.
Okay, that's great. All right. So if anybody wants to contribute to a vision of how we're gonna, what we want people to say, or you just want to do it free form, that's fine. I think free form is fine. So we will come up with a decision by the 5th of January.
Awesome. Well, guys, I would love to have any of you guys on this and look forward to really finding the right consultant to work with us. So thank you for your time tonight. And we will talk in January once you've selected your interview committee member, and we'll keep you apprised of the process as we go through it. And as I said, on February 10th, the bids will be open via Zoom, and we can let everybody know who submitted their RFQs.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie and Cassie, and for all the members of the zoning bylaw working group that continues to carry the torch on this. It's really a great service to the town. All right, so let's move into our next item of business. Let's see what time it is. So we are about, we're not too bad. We're about 15 minutes over our schedule. So let's begin. This is a discussion, a request for certificate to allow recording of subdivision plan 1998 Jerusalem Road Estates subdivision pursuant to MGL Chapter 41S 81X. And I'm going to ask Lauren Lind and Miss Carolyn Murray to bring us up to speed on the situation. Lauren will first sort of provide the background, and then Miss Murray will discuss the legal issues.
Certainly, thank you. So I'm going to summarize just a sort of history of my understanding of this site, and then I'm going to turn over to our counsel to sort of walk through the legal logistics of this. So this request, in essence, it's a request to be able to file a subdivision that was never filed at the Registry of Deeds after it was approved back in circa 98, 99. And it's supposed to be filed within 6 months of approval. That never happened. It's been a significant time that's lapsed. And as such, it's no longer a valid subdivision. They couldn't sort of move forward on that without having this signature to proceed to file it with the Registry of Deeds. The history of this site, it's the Jerusalem Road Estates, which is a large, several acres of land situated between Black Rock Road and Jerusalem Road. And I'm just going to read you some notes that I went through that came from the previous administrator for the zoning and planning boards. Many of you may remember Joanne Pilsack. This property first came for preliminary subdivision in 1996. It was denied in April of that year. There's no copy of the denial in the planning board records, and they never refiled that version. Another subdivision was filed in 1998, which is this one that's being referenced tonight. It was approved in October of 98. The decision is on file at the town clerk. It never received Board of Health or Sewer Commission approval and permits. The subdivision was never built. The file was discarded in December of 2013 with permission of the state. And then same property, different circumstance, but another preliminary plan for 6 lots was filed and disapproved on in May of 2006. Never refiled, disapproval on file with the town clerk, file also discarded in December of 2013 with permission of the state. It's after a certain period of time has vested, you're allowed to, with permission of the state, remove certain what would typically be files that you would maintain. So we in town don't have a formal record of those files any longer. So without further ado, I'm going to just pivot to Carolyn. And I also see, I know we've had a flurry of comments in the comment box. Thank you all. I see some of you are here for different items on the agenda. We also have Robert Buckley from Reimer and Bronstein, who is the attorney who filed this. I'm going to promote him now.
I just want to remind the planning board members that this is not a public hearing on this. This is a discussion. Ms. Murray will give us some advice.
Madam Chair, just curious, would you like to actually hear from the attorney representing Jerusalem Estates first, and then I could circle back to the board, or would you rather hear from me first?
Let me get a feeling from the board. What would the board like to do?
Well, let the applicant's representative say their thing, and then afterwards, then our council can give us advice.
It looks like everybody agrees with that.
Well, I mean, it kind of begs the question, can we even entertain this?
That's my question, is whether or
If
not.
Carolyn says we can't entertain this, then let's not waste everybody's time.
Right. So
I can respond to that. I can tell you that you can entertain it, so you would not be wasting your time.
Okay.
But you might
Thank
have
you.
another option as well.
Yeah, all right.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair. For the record, Robert Buckley, Raymond Bronstein. Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm here this evening on Jerusalem Road Limited Partnership, and I view this as primarily an administrative request to find out what has happened since the original approval of the definitive subdivision plan. The summary was correct. The plan was not recorded. There is a statutory provision that allows for a certificate from the town clerk or the planning board to attest that the plan has not been rescinded, modified, amended, or changed. Merely, I was making a request to find out what is the current status and what are the issues. I view it as clearly administrative. If what is said is correct, that should be set forth in a certificate, and then we'll make our decision based upon that information.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley, if that's the sum of your comments.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Murray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as the planning director was briefing you a few moments ago, there's clearly no dispute that this subdivision plan was never recorded. But we also went back through the rules and regulations and actually the subdivision decision itself. The subdivision decision, such as it was, if you had a chance to look at it, you saw that it was rather brief. It did not have any kind of requirement in it that required recording of the subdivision decision within a certain time frame. It also didn't have any kind of requirement that said that the subdivision needed to be completed by, or that if construction hadn't begun by a certain point in time, there was no provision in there for the applicant to come back to the planning board for an extension either. Looking at your subdivision regulations that were in effect at the time, there was also nothing that required recording of the plan by a certain time frame. There was a requirement in those regulations. I think it's section F as in Frank, F.5. They did require that within 10 days of the plan being recorded, the applicant was supposed to provide notice of the same to the planning board, but it never said when the plan actually had to be recorded. So based on that, I do think that even though an awful lot of time has passed, I do think that the board, if you are so inclined, you could consider issuing a certificate. However, one question that I do have, and I don't know that we have an answer to this at the moment, is whether or not any kind of bond or security, or even like a tri-party agreement, whether that was ever submitted at the time that the subdivision was originally approved. Because certainly if that had been submitted, that has long since expired. And I think that the board could certainly require a new security in whatever form to be submitted. I also think that if the security had never been submitted at all, or even if it's just lapsed, I think that the board also has a basis to consider whether they want to modify or possibly even rescind the subdivision under section 81W. This is a provision of the subdivision control law that does allow the planning board of its own motion to have the power to modify, amend, or even rescind its approval of a plan of a subdivision, or to require some sort of change of a previously approved subdivision. And it's interesting that the statute says specifically the board could require a change in a plan as a condition of its retaining the status of an approved plan. So certainly there might be things that have changed since the late 1990s when this was approved, and today perhaps it doesn't entirely meet a certain standards, but at a minimum, the surety standard was in, or the requirement was in place in the late 90s, and would certainly be something that would be a concern for the board today, to make sure that if you're inclined to allow this subdivision to continue to have life, you would want it to be, you would want there to be associated security. If you do decide that you would prefer to modify or to rescind this subdivision approval, the board does have to follow the public hearing process that what would normally apply with, at legal advertising and notice that would have to be sent out prior to a hearing. So you can't actually vote to rescind or modify this evening. You could vote to schedule a hearing to consider modifying or rescinding the subdivision if you so choose.
All right, thank you. Mr. Callahan?
So tonight in front of us is a request. We can reject the request, but then you're saying we have to take a step 2 to either to decide what to do with the 98 decision.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Potter?
I'm just thinking out loud here. I don't know a whole heck of a lot about the way this works, but my guess is that what's the intent behind having the requirement to record within a certain amount of time? And I would think that that's so that, if an extensive amount of time passes, a future planning board of new members, a future town that's, changed its demographics, or the way it's, allowing for things to be built would not be, this approval doesn't last in perpetuity, which is why I would seem like the intent of recording it would be to kind of put everybody on notice and public notice and lock that up for them. So in an instance like this, where so much time has gone by, I think at a minimum, we'd want to make sure that the 98 subdivision is in line with where we are now on how we would approve subdivisions. So I don't know that we necessarily would modify it, but I think there's got to be some sort of analysis to at least see if, everything would still check out in today's world.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. I'd like to ask Ms. Murray, in light of the fact, Ms. Murray, that we really have no documentation about this situation, how can we actually act on something that really is largely unsubstantiated?
When you say you have no documentation, I do understand from the planning director that a number of files no longer are at the town's disposal for whatever reason. Does that also include, we were provided a copy of the 1998 plan. And I think that would be the starting point for the board. And we do have the decision, as I said, the decision isn't terribly detailed, but we do at least have the 1998 plan, to review. Are we able to say whether or not anything has been modified? Perhaps we are, perhaps not, if we've only got this one plan.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment?
Yes, Mr. Buckley.
Council is correct. I mean, with respect to the ability to, on its own motion or after a public hearing, take action on this subdivision. But that's a separate item. I made my request of the town clerk to just certify that they have received no notice of any change, modification, or rescission. To me, that's purely administrative to allow the recording of the plan. If the board decides to modify or make alterations, that's their prerogative after a public hearing. But we're not here this evening to debate the desirability or the intent to examine the subdivision plan, or would things be done differently. You have your legal rights and statutes to do that. This is purely an administrative request of the clerk. The statute says the planning board or the clerk to say, have you received any notice that this plan has been altered, modified, rescinded, or changed? Simple as that. And that allows the plan to be recorded. It's not going to change anyone's substantive rights because of the time delay. That if the board decides to, seek alteration or modification or change, that's a whole separate process. And again, it's purely administrative what I'm looking to do.
So, Ms. Murray, I'd like to ask, is it custom to file documents like this within a standard period of time? Is that the custom? All right, so then, okay, so then in this instance, this is essentially operating against custom if we are to enable the request on behalf of Mr. Buckley to be maintained. Mr. Brewer?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was any state law or case law that would pertain to this particular circumstance.
I didn't come across anything with such a long time lapse in between.
Right.
Are there any legal analogs that would apply?
Yeah, there are.
Okay, could you?
I was quickly thinking of under the rules of civil procedure that I operate with frequently, the motion to vacate a judgment. One part of it says you have a year, and you know certain reasons you can cite. You go beyond a year, you have to have a pretty damn good reason, and it's got to be something extraordinary. And I have never in 36 years of practicing law seen anybody come back for relief 23 years after the fact. I think this would be a horrible, horrible precedent. It would be unheard of in any context, whether it's vacating a judgment, amending a permit, whatever. I can't think of a context in the law where anything like this would be allowed. If we can cut to the chase, I'd like to make a motion to reject this request and that we set up a meeting, a public hearing for the purpose of rescinding this. I want to go forward, got to go back to square one.
Right, thank you.
I second that.
Grady? All right, I have a motion before us. Is there any comment or discussion? All right, then I will ask for, well, let me ask Ms. Murray, am I able to call for a vote?
Do you have a second?
I do.
Okay, sorry, didn't hear that. Then yes, you can call for the vote.
All right, thank you. I'm going to do it in alphabetical order. Clark Brewer.
Clark Brewer, aye.
Paul Grady.
Paul Grady, aye.
Tom Callahan.
Aye.
Eric Potter.
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. Could I just ask, Madam Chair, that the records show that I wasn't asking the planning board for the certificate. I was asking the town clerk to perform an administrative function. And you're delving into substantive issues. And as to the timeline with vacating a judgment, the statute is silent as to the period of when a certificate can be presented. And again, this is administrative, is not substantive. So you have your rights, we have our rights, we'll see where it goes.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Buckley. All right, so our next item is to discuss lot release request, lot number 6, Heritage Lane subdivision. We have a peer review, and then I want to hear from the board's members regarding the peer review's comments. So will you please promote our peer reviewer, Ms.
Madam
Lynn?
Chair. Sorry, thank you. I'm just going to interrupt for a minute. We have just a series of participants who are interested in that one item, so we're doing a lot of cycling through some participants right now. So we're going to work on bringing up the panelists who need to come up for this, but I just also wanted to note briefly, my colleague Jen Oren has arrived, and she wasn't here in the beginning of the meeting, but Jen has some information that she'd like to share with the board before we get to the end of the meeting.
All right, so with regard to the members of the public, in light of the fact that we have truncated the discussion about this specific item and are going to proceed to a means by which a public hearing will be formed, I'm not sure whether we would want to go through the public discussion. So I'm asking advice, Lauren, should we allow the public to discuss, or we basically close the issue?
Yeah, this wasn't a public hearing, and I don't think at this time it would be appropriate, but we will, the board will be posting as suggested, and that'll be available on the town's public meeting calendar, and you can reach out to the planning board office if you're interested in information about that.
All right, thank you. Then are we now waiting to tee up the peer review?
We're going to hear from Jen, and then we will jump into our next agenda item.
All right, thank you.
Can I just interrupt? I want to just make sure, since we have so many people here for this Jerusalem Road Estates, that they know what the next step is going to be. I'm sorry if it doesn't seem exactly clear.
So I did just explain, but I'll re-explain in more
Yeah, I'm
detail.
sorry.
There's going to be, no worries. There's going to be a public hearing advertised. I need to determine a date, but there will be a public hearing so that the board can move forward with a motion to deny, rescind the approval of that estate subdivision from 1998. So if you're interested in more information about that, it will ultimately be posted as a planning board meeting item through the town meeting public calendar, and you can contact the planning board office for information on that.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Oram.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's time. I know you have a busy night, and I was late getting here due to technical difficulties, but I wanted to alert the board, so most of you would hear it from me, that I gave my notice yesterday with the town of Cohasset after 16 years. I have accepted a position.
Wait. Everybody's closed.
So I have accepted a position in the town of Hingham as their new zoning administrator and senior planner, and I will begin on January 10th. I will be still working in the office and will help with some transition. But I just wanted you all to know that I've thoroughly enjoyed working with all of you since 2018, 17, with the town for a long time. Love being with Lauren. We're always going to keep in touch. We're going to sort of really work on always working, since we're neighbors, we'll be working together. So I know that Tom heard from a couple people, and I just wanted the rest of you to hear it from me. So we won't be strangers, but I am departing.
Well, congratulations for this, and sad for us, but really what a wonderful promotion. That's very wonderful. And thank you for all your work and all your kindness and your care for the board and its work.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I miss you, Jen.
I'm gonna miss you guys very much. And my one note as we head on to the next steps, let's remember it's the holidays and we're all still friends. So let's have a good, thorough meeting but move on, right? All together. And I will be seeing you all obviously through the holidays, and I live in the area, so I thank you all.
So when are you actually going off to your new job?
So my first day will be January 10th.
Oh, so will you take time off?
And intermittently, my last official day with the town of Cohasset is the 7th, but I will be helping transition the zoning board and anything else that they need help with. Hingham is very amenable to my helping with any transition. We have a thorough transition plan in place, and yeah, it's bittersweet for sure, but I'm excited. My kids are older. It's time for for a change. I also grew up in Hingham, and my office is in the building where I went to junior high, and my office will be on the floor where my locker was. So I think it's just kind of meant to be.
So you're not going to be a
Jen,
Cohassetanian.
you could admit it. You're just going because they have a better town hall than we do.
It's
There's no
super
going on.
nice.
It is nice. I register the vote there every year.
Yeah, it's nice.
Oh, well, very congratulations. And
Thank you.
we'll all come in and say that individually, I'm sure.
All right. Well, I thank you for this. Let me interrupt this program, and I appreciate all of you, and I will be here watching the rest of the meeting. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, boy. Woo. So that kind of stopped the discussion.
I know.
So
Thank
let's,
you, Jen.
now we're going to move on to another subdivision. Mr. Reardon, please welcome, and please give us a summary of your peer review.
Could I just
you're
hop
going
in first? Sorry, just to brief you. First, I'm not seeing the applicant in the attendee section. So if there's an applicant representative, please make yourself known. I'll give the board a history, and then if the applicant doesn't present themselves, I'm just gonna recommend, I mean, we can hear from Jim, his peer review, and then I'll recommend that we just continue this to another time without having the applicant be able to.
I just got an email from somebody that says, I'm on Zoom. Should I be a panelist? The number 617-733-1822. Let me get that person to identify who they are.
Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell, and it's Greg Morse, and he's very familiar with accessing our meetings, so that's why I'm just not sure. I don't see anybody from Morse's office, but anyway, quickly, I'm going to tell you that this is a lot release request for a subdivision. It's Heritage Lane. This is a subdivision that was approved back, I want to say it was 2006. I don't have it right immediately in front of me. And this is the last lot in their subdivision that they're looking to come back and release. The subdivision's complete. They want to release this last lot so that they can proceed with development. The last time that this had come around had been circa 2011, at the time where they were taking a couple more of the lots that had been held by the town, which were released at the time. And this is the last piece remaining. At the time, John Modulewski had done a peer review and outlined a couple of items. So we received a request back from Morse Engineering, I want to say in August of this year, initially asking for the lot release request. We asked at the time that they sort of provide some more information as to what the standards were and what the status was, and respond to the last peer review letter back from 2011, in which they did in about November, and that's why we have this here before you tonight. We did tee up Weston and Sampson, so Jim Reardon has conducted a peer review of the subdivision to make sure things are up to the standards that they need to be before this board would move forward with a lot release request. So with that, like I said, I typically would turn to the applicant to give you some more history. But again, I don't see that they're here. So, Madam Chair, would you like to hear from our peer reviewer about this application, or would you like to defer until, or if Ms. Murray has an opinion on this? I'm not sure how to handle when the applicant is not here.
Okay, so just a minute. Carolyn, would you like to say something? And then it will be Eric.
I was going to say, you certainly can go forward with the hearing with or without the applicant present, but obviously your discussion is going to be somewhat curtailed since the applicant is not going to have an opportunity to respond this evening. I mean, Jen, Lauren, did you hear at all as to whether or not the applicant was intending to be here, or whether they were expecting someone else to attend?
Today. No, I spoke with them earlier today, so that's why I'm just surprised.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just be hesitant to move forward with the peer review without the applicant here, because oftentimes the applicant is listening to what the peer review is saying, and then it becomes, everybody's on the same page and hears it all at once together. So my concern would be we're kind of putting ourselves in a position where the applicant could say, well, I wasn't at that meeting and didn't hear what was going on, and maybe we have to go through this whole process again. So maybe it makes sense just to wait until everyone's here.
And we don't have to continue this. It's not a public hearing. It's just, we'll just reschedule.
Right.
So then I would ask the planning board members to please read Mr. Reardon's evaluation of the situation, because there will be items that we will ultimately wish to discuss when we can find the time to do that.
I have read
Read
it, and I have read it, and I don't think our decision would be any different whether the applicant was here or not. It seems like there's still work that has to be done. So
Right.
might be best for the applicant if we just inform the applicant of that now, tonight, and then they can get on working on the solution.
Thank you. Ms. Lind?
Thank you. Yes, that was kind of the conversation that I had with the applicant earlier today, actually, that, you know, given there is items that have been flagged, that this would likely be a matter that we would also take up in January. I was thinking you could get a summary tonight, but what I would recommend at this point is we just plan, it's not a continuation because it's not a public hearing, but we would just plan to schedule this on our second January agenda, which is January 26th. And that way that gives enough time between now and then that they hopefully could even address the items that have been flagged in peer review between now and then.
Sounds good.
So, okay, all right. If that's all right with the chair, we'll proceed that way.
That's fine. All right. Ms. Lind, would you like to tee up the next item?
Yes, let me pull up the public hearing notice because this is a public hearing. And this is the section where we're going to open the public hearing for the proposed amendments to Common Drive rules and regulations and the access regulations. I will note for members of the public who may have joined us later, we will have a public comment period during this public hearing session, and we would ask that you input your name and address into the Q and answer function if you haven't already. We'll get to you in the order that you put it in, and please try to refrain from being repetitive and keep your comments to 3 minutes maximum, and we'll ask you to state your name and address for the record before you address the board. So thank you. And again, just pulling up this public hearing notice.
Lauren, do I read this?
Yes. All right, 1 minute, it's right here.
Once upon a time.
There we are. Oh no, that's the wrong one, sorry. My calendar's not working now. It's when everybody's watching.
It was the night before Christmas.
Here it is.
You had it a minute ago.
It was the wrong one. There's one that's the public hearing notice that gets posted on the calendar, and then there's one that's the meeting agenda. Here we are, finally.
Yeah, I was going to say I have it too if you need it.
There you go. Sorry for the delay on that.
Right. Notice of public hearing, Cohasset Planning Board. Pursuant to MGL Chapter 41S 81Q, the Cohasset Planning Board will hold a virtual public meeting on the Zoom platform webinar 879-2585-4802, password 186714 on Wednesday, December 15th, 2021 at 7 p.m. for proposed amendments to the Planning Board rules and regulations for common driveway minimum standards. The proposal is to rescind the existing common driveway minimum standard to be replaced with new language titled Residential Property Access Regulations of the Planning Board for Non-Subdivision Control Ways. A copy of proposed amendments is on file in the Town Clerk's office at Cohasset Town Hall, 41 Highland Avenue, with office hours of Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m., and Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Electronic copies of said documentation can be obtained by visiting the Town Cohasset Planning Board website, link https://www.cohassetma.org /214 Planning Board, or by contacting Planning Director Lauren Lind via email at lind@cohassetma.org. Any person interested or wishing to be heard on the application should access the virtual meeting at the time designated. Signed, Amy Glassmeyer, Chair, Planning Board.
All right. Ms. Lind, would you like to?
I can bring up the document if you'd like to go through that. It's up to the board how you wish to proceed. I think
Right,
Tom
so-
Callahan was going to lead this portion.
Last season, 5 years into the
Okay,
future.
so just, wait a minute, somebody
I just,
has a mic open?
yeah, I just question, is it okay to ask about what we're doing right now? Just so I have an understanding before
Right, so-
Tom gets going.
Okay, actually, Tom's gonna explain it.
Well,
What's your question,
Oh.
Eric?
the question is, in light of tonight's decision, is this hearing that what we're doing right now, was it based upon a presumption last night's decision voted yes or no? Are they dependent on one another or not? I think that's.
No.
No,
Also-
no, well, all right, so let me say a few things about this. Regarding the decision the other night, the discussion the other night, on Monday night, this regulation was brought into that discussion and conflated with that discussion, I think incorrectly, in a way to scare everybody. I would say that, by the way, whether those definitions on Monday night are on a piece of paper or not, they are state law. They are what we have to follow. They are the standard that we have to apply in all of our A&R decisions. We have tried to do that in the past, and we will do that going forward. So the fact that they're not written down on a piece of paper in the Cohasset bylaw does not change how this board operates with respect to the issues of adequacy of ways. I think, again, this regulation was brought in and conflated with the discussion the other night. I think there was, and this was expressed at the selectmen's meeting last night as well. There was a lot of lack of transparency, lack of disclosure of people's agendas and specific interests. I think before we have this discussion tonight, I think that if there are conflicts of interest amongst us, those should be disclosed now, and those people who have those conflicts ought to recuse themselves. But as I see this, these regulations could go forward under our current definitions. They could go forward under those definitions if they had passed. I have thought about that in light of Monday night. However, we can either go forward with the whole package here, or we could just amend the common driveway part, which is, in terms of regulations, what we have on paper right now. Right now, today, we only have regulations relating to common driveways. This is intended to amend that, and this is intended to add regulations for those roads that are not created under the subdivision control law, but which are something larger than a common driveway.
So just very, very quickly, Tom, so because this will help me, and I honestly I'm confused here, because I can see where people are saying, well, okay, there's going to be, let's say there's phase one of the 2-phase zoning rewrite that that the town's going to be doing. Why at this point, especially after town meeting, why wouldn't we, though these items kind of be part of, let's say, that phase one, as opposed to separate and distinct from phase one? And that's where I'm having trouble really understanding the necessity of that. Or maybe there is a justifiable one. I'm open to hearing about it. I just can't get over that hurdle.
I will answer that. So the zoning working group has brought forward some articles in the last 2 rounds of town meeting now. And in so doing, we have addressed topics which seem to have some immediate import to our work and the work of the zoning board. We all know we're sitting there, and this goes back to decisions the town made with the bylaw in the late 60s, and the way they changed frontage and changed the pattern of development in this town. And we are now seeing today, as we approach closer to full build out, that what's left to be developed are back lots of land off of either no ways, and people want to build something like a common driveway, or on ways that are very small and old. And we have struggled with that. And a few months ago, just 2 months ago, when proposal off of Black Horse Lane came before us, we all sat here confounded by what we were looking at, couldn't really define what that way was. And one of our members here was prepared to entertain a motion to deny the A&R, and then the applicant withdrew it. So it's an issue that's constantly coming before us. And whatever happens with the rest of the rewrite, for this board to adequately define ways, means of access, and what is adequate is something we need to do, whether we work with our current bylaw for the next 30 years, or if we work with a new bylaw. And this was a particular issue. And you heard the comments that, oh, well, we didn't participate, we can't. This is one article people can't absorb. Even in the phasing process, we are going to be facing 10 articles at a time, maybe more, depending on where we're making changes. You're talking about phase one. Yeah, phase one is going to include a redo of all the definitions in Article 2 of the bylaw. What those are going to be yet, we haven't discussed. We haven't got into the substance, but it's part of the reorganization. Part of it is to move definitions that are various places all over the bylaw because of articles we've added over the years and put them back into one place. And then to go through it, what definitions do we still use and need? What new definitions to deal with modern times do we need to add? So yeah, that article for Monday night will probably come back in that package.
And everything.
So, but we decided to move to get forward with that Monday because in the meantime, how we are dealing with these ways of various sizes, shapes, and degrees of adequacy is a problem for us to address now, and that's why we brought it forward now, to help this board and to help the zoning board. Again, these regulations today is, all right, so, again, we already have common driveway regulations. Our common driveway regulations require a certain amount of width, a certain amount of pavement. That's where, and people were complaining the other night about 20-foot wide pavement. Well, newsflash, it's in the current regulation. That's actually where we got the technical requirements in this new regulation come from the existing common driveway one. We're just expanding it to also discuss roadways that are something between a common driveway and a formal subdivision road. So there's nothing new and radical here, but we've talked about the common driveway issue. We know that we allow up to 8 houses to be built off of it. That's skirting, in the opinion of many, the subdivision control law. It's rendering the subdivision control law meaningless. We're an outlier, and the zoning working group has the data to back that up, that there aren't other towns that are allowing 8. So, we could sit here tonight, if you're concerned about what Monday's impact was on this, and just deal with the common driveway amendment part, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But I also think we could go forward with the whole shooting match tonight, regardless of what happened Monday, and regardless of what happens in the future.
All right, thank you. Mr. Grady?
Tom, this question is directed towards you. So what you said, we're not doing anything that isn't already on the books, state law, correctly? Am I correct?
Well, no.
I just want to clarify.
No, the definitions that were proposed on Monday were state law.
All right, that's what I was asking.
This is a regulation that, yes, we're writing this for the town of Cohasset.
Okay.
I'm saying it includes technical specifications on how wide a common drive or a non-subdivision road has to be. It includes the construction techniques, and that was largely taken from the existing construction specifications in our existing common driveway regulations.
So why wouldn't we go forward with all of it?
So let me just point something out for example. So in our existing regulations that I'm looking at, section 2, a common driveway shall be within a 40-foot easement. I was complained about the other night that we were doing something extraordinarily radically different. And then for the again, we have a sliding scale of how many houses we'll allow that we're proposing to change, but for 3 to 5 houses, 20 feet of pavement, for 6 to 8, 24 feet. And there were people disingenuously putting out there the other night that 20 feet is crazy and it's not something we have ever required. It's right there in our existing regulations.
So again, I'll repeat myself. Why don't we just go forward with all of it?
Well,
right now?
again, I will leave it to the board as a whole, whether to go forward partially or the whole thing, but.
Amy, may I just answer Paul's question? Just because I think I'm trying to sit in the middle here. I think most people have agendas, right? If you're for something, there's an agenda. If you're against something, there's an agenda. And I think the problem that the planning board is going to have here my concern is this. I couldn't go to the town meeting, but I listened to it. So there's clearly a group of people that opposed this. And then there's also a group of people that are in support of this. But with the zoning bylaw rewrite coming up, I think that if you're looking at things from agenda, what's the agenda here? Why are we doing this now? I think it almost gives fire to an oppositional group to say, well, there's an agenda here to throw these, to push these particular items. Whereas with the zoning rewrite coming up, and it seems more logical from a public perception, is to get the zoning consultant in place and have these items then go in a phase 1 proposal, as opposed to being just separate from the process, if something that really folks want to win at a town meeting.
Eric,
But that's why.
So,
Eric, this is a regulation. This is not part of the bylaws.
yeah,
Okay.
and I want to say something, which is that, Eric, at this point, we are at a logjam when it comes to the situation of the common driveway. We are making this gesture so that we can do our job. We can't do our job. The Black Horse Lane demonstrated that 2 years ago we said one thing, 3 years ago we said one thing, and now we were saying something else. We are only codifying what already is and making it clearer so that we don't end up with a situation of making an arbitrary decision, which we actually have done in the time that I've been on the board. So this is trying to actually adhere to some sort of consistency so that we're not constantly going back and trying to figure out, what did we do here? What did we do there? This is not changing the bylaw. This is simply regulating, we're re-articulating the existing regulations.
And I want to emphasize again that under our current definitions, under proposed definitions, under the state law that we have to apply in the question of adequacy of a way, we need to better define what that is. And that's what this regulation is doing, is by putting dimensional and construction standards that should be applicable to both common driveways and the private ways that are not subdivision roads. We already have it for common driveways. We do want to make a very critical amendment to the common driveway regulations in terms of dimension and number of houses served. But what this regulation is trying to do is help us when faced with a Black Horse Lane, any number of small lanes in town where people are proposing development off them, is what is adequate. And I think that help is needed regardless of what happens with the rewrite. Because we have the standard of adequacy to apply in A&R situations right now under state law. And with respect to agendas, look, there was a citizen who commented and thought that we who were proposing this had an agenda. I was kind of confused about the comment, and it almost sounded like that he was saying that only people with special interests should be writing bylaws, which was absurd. But the opposition, except for one citizen who spoke, were all part of the development community. None of that was disclosed. Relationships were not disclosed. And there's a difference between an agenda and a conflict of interest. Do I have an agenda in the sense that I'm a member of the zoning working group and I am eagerly working to try to rewrite the bylaw because it needs update? Yeah, if you want to call that an agenda, I do, but I don't have a conflict of interest. I don't have a road, my road, that's going to be affected by this. My pocketbook isn't going to be affected by this. And I'm here as a citizen serving the town. And to answer that gentleman who made that comment that night, if he's listening, I'm here to serve the town as a whole. And, you know, it's unfortunate that the rules of decorum applied to town meeting don't let us point out people's conflicts of interest. But you know, we, the planning board, control this public hearing process, and I think we need to address that issue. And I think we need to ensure that there's transparency in this process. I told you earlier that, you know, the consultant that's going to be hired is going to help us with the public relations and the presentations and the forums and that thing. But it's in-house that we're writing this bylaw. And I said earlier, I'll say it again, you will get transparency and disclosure. You will see these things. And there's a danger in that, by the way, because, you know, you see things in working form, in draft, that people will take as, oh my God, the sky's falling. Look what they're trying to do. But you will get that pledge, but we didn't get those pledges the other night. We didn't get that transparency, and I'm asking for it here tonight before we begin this public hearing process. As far as what we discuss, again, I'm open to suggestions, but I think these regulations can go forward despite what we do with the bylaw. I think we need them in a lot of ways. I think we should establish standards for how roadways and access points are built from the point of safety for public safety vehicles, for fuel delivery vehicles, as well as the residents who are living on the street, those streets. So I'll say my piece, and I'll wait to see if anybody else is going to say anything about, you know, being transparent. So.
Mr. Brewer?
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, what's interesting is I suppose there could be construed to be conflicts of interest. Tom, you live on a private way. Glassmeyer lives on a private way. I live on a private way. The thing that was interesting about the bylaw that was presented, and the reason that I was against it, and I explained it in great detail, is it started out with an evaluation of common driveways. And I think that that Woody did an evaluation of Ocean Ledges, and Katie Dugan did an evaluation of Diab Lane. I understand that there were some other common driveway or private way evaluations, but I haven't seen any of the others. And somehow it expanded into a regulation for private ways without any analysis of the private ways that would have been useful for the public hearings. They were the private ways and common driveways were conflated as if they were the same, and in my points they look the same. As well as unaccepted subdivision roads look the same as public ways, but legally they aren't the same. And I think that the public needed to be aware of what their liabilities and responsibilities and benefits might be under those different scenarios.
Well, you know,
but I saw a direct conflict with the historic character of Cohasset and some of these private ways that exist prior to zoning. And I think that an evaluation of access and frontage is done as a part of an A&R. And I did have some issues with what was put into the bylaw, that the Mass General Law 4181L was misrepresented as 4 ways to provide frontage when there are 3, as well as the SJC rulings seem to have been an amalgam of SJC rulings rather than one specific SJC ruling. Although I'd like Tom to produce where that came from in his appendix.
What his appendix?
Your SJC
you know what?
reference in the appendix, Tom. I'd like to know where that comes from.
What
Wait a minute.
appendix
Okay,
are
now
you-
wait.
All right,
I,
hold on.
I still have
Let me
the
address
floor.
this. I'm a big
I
boy.
still have the floor and I want to make one more comment. I think that the common driveway standards are fine. They've been in place for quite some time. I'm open to changing them. What I would like to see is to have the planning board review any common driveways that come forward so that we can see how what we approved on an A&R would be has been worked out. In addition, what I'd recommend for this board is that we do an inventory of common driveways that have been put in over the last 10 years or 20 years, whatever it is. Because I only know of two of them. One is Ocean Ledges and the other is off of Norman Todd. I think that we should take a field trip and take a look at how these have been put together for
right,
how
I
many
wanna-
houses,
Yeah,
and then
I need-
further talk about maybe passing.
point of
modifications.
order, point of order. We are talking about regulations. We are not talking about this back and forth. So I want to return the discussion.
I'm just making a
Mr. Brewer,
suggestion for
Mr.
moving this
Brewer,
forward.
point of order. I want to return the discussion to what we started with, which is the statement written in the public hearing and to what extent we agree or do not agree with that. And if we wish to have a conversation about private ways, if we want to have a discussion about common driveways in the manner that you're having it, then we should schedule that conversation. But right now, we are in the midst.
It's open. I
Mr.
think it's open
Brewer,
to whatever
Order, Mr.
the
Brewer.
board wants.
Mr. Brewer, please. We are in a discussion about regulations. We have a question before the board. Can I get a motion from one of the members of the board with regard to the proposed regulations?
I don't think I don't want to shy away from this debate because I think it's important.
You want a motion without discussion?
Point of order. We
No,
can, it's not about shying away. It's about getting to the point. We get to the point and then we go to the other issue. We're not going to put them together because all we're going to do is go back and forth. So I would ask for a motion
To do what?
to accept the recommendations that are made in the public hearing.
Even I'll agree we're not ready for that yet.
Well, there's a draft regulation, right?
let
This
me-
residential property access regulations of the planning board.
Point of order, you are not being called on.
No, I don't need to be called on. This is the planning board discussion, ma'am.
It is
So
when you.
Why don't you just decide what you are asking?
What I'm asking is to return to the subject of our discussion in the public hearing. And we've gotten off track in terms of lots of different examples, none of which we have any evidence for at this moment. So let's go back to the discussion as it is specified in the public hearing. Ms. Lind?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to remind you that this is a public hearing and we haven't taken public comment before the board were to make a motion that you might wish to entertain public comment.
Yes, I noticed that there was public comments. Would you like to promote Mr. Stevens?
Sure. I'm going to promote Jack Creighton here is from the Select Board. He's had his hand raised for quite some time. And I'll just note that there's several other comments that we have in the record that are that marked as answered. Those were for the previous agenda item and we'll have their information to include in the record. So that's why those are no longer open. Thank you. Mr. Creighton?
Yes, hi, thank you very much. I think everybody's having a good time. A couple of things I think are, and I was also on the zoning task force. The purpose of this was to simplify and bring clarity to a mishmash of interpretations and also to bring these things in compliance with state law. We are under state law already. this just clarifies that. There's also been a lot of talk about, well, we don't understand it. Well, I know the background of a number of people who spoke, some very, very significant development backgrounds and very large projects. To suggest that they didn't know and they couldn't understand that is, shall we say, interesting. Of course they understood it. That's why they were there. So I think we can dispense with that as an argument. People knew. That's why they were. That is why they were there. I think what we're simply looking to do is codify things and make it fair and understandable and consistent to everybody. Because when things are confusing, things get through. And frequently, if you want to get something through, you throw a lot of smoke and mirrors in the air and make it confusing, and then you get what you want. So I think that we need to get this done clearly. This is nothing radical. These are, for the most part, things that are already there. And I do think it's also important for public integrity to make sure that people who speak, who have a vested interest or decision makers should disclose that. And thank you, by the way, thank you very much for all the hard work that you have done. And I speak for the whole town. You guys and all members have worked extraordinarily hard, hours and hours and hours. And the town owes you a big thank you. Thank you.
You know what, may I, Madam Chair, may I for a minute?
Yes, you may.
And I've been glancing at the comments in the Q&A. There's a gentleman, Mike, who's made quite a few points very well taken, and you know, your public comments are allowed, and we will let people speak, and your comments are being read. I'll just say, I don't like the Zoom forum either, but that's the cards we've been dealt right now. I don't expect to close this hearing tonight, and there'll be more opportunity, but I'd like to just cut to the chase, because there's all of this, you know, there's a question here about how many properties will this affect? Well, definitions, you know, Monday night, like again, I want to separate the definition issue from these regulations. Definitions affect everybody. Everybody's bound to those definitions that we apply. And we're all bound to those state law standards about adequacy of a road. What these regulations are trying to do is for the town of Cohasset to identify for itself what it deems to be adequate, at least in terms of dimensional requirements and construction requirements of the roads we use in this town. The regulation says that if you have an existing road, common driveway, non-subdivision road, and nothing's being added to the use of that road, nothing happens. You're not being required to upgrade. It's the upgrade part of it that has probably got the development community in a stink, and it's probably got you in a stink, Clark, because I think you should disclose that you live on a very small lane that you are trying to develop a lot.
I've got it.
All right, you know what, and the positions you're taking with regard to adequacy and the ambiguities in our bylaw are now of public record. But let me say this: these regulations, the upgrade requirement that everybody would be concerned about, will apply if, only if, you are adding residential dwellings, a house, to an existing way after a finding first that by either the building inspector or the planning board that the way is inadequate to take that added burden of another house. If it is deemed inadequate, then an upgrade can be required, and the upgrade will fall on the person who's
Tom, you're talking about the bylaw that didn't
No,
pass,
I am
right?
talking
And
about
how
the
that mechanism-
regulation. I am talking about the regulation, the
Or
bylaw.
the A&R
The
under
bylaw,
4181L?
all right. Clark, you do a wonderful job of trying to obfuscate the issue.
No, I'm just trying to find out what you're talking about, Tom.
All right, I'm talking about what this regulation is actually doing that might have some people tied up in knots, including yourself. First of all, what this regulation is doing is it's creating dimensional requirements for both common driveways and non-subdivision roads. Okay? And it clearly sets out what those are. Both require a 40-foot easement. Both have their varying degrees of layout, pavement, and the common driveway portion of that is taken from our existing common driveway regulations. For the common driveway, the substantive change is to limit the number of lots that can be served with to 3, which is more the norm, which the zoning working group has researched thoroughly, and to change its maximum length to 350 feet. The reason for that is to not have a common driveway be a go-around to the subdivision control law. The non-subdivision street and way doesn't have a maximum number of lots that can be served by it, but it has a 750-foot length. And then, as you all probably know, in our subdivision control law, if you get to that level, there's a 1,500-foot length limitation to a subdivision control road. So it's a gradual step up. The bylaw makes clear that there are 3 ways of access to properties, residential properties in town. A street that is privately owned but not created under the subdivision control law, the common driveway, and then the road created under the subdivision control law. We have a separate set of regulations under the subdivision control law. We have today a common driveway regulation. We have no regulation for the dimensional or construction requirements for that non-subdivision privately owned road. Now, so we set those standards. Those standards apply to everybody in town. In the interest of disclosure, I live on a private way, but it's a private way that was built as a subdivision in the 60s, and it's got a roadway that's pretty close to subdivision standards. It's not going to be deemed inadequate. I also don't have any room for any new houses to be built on it. What it goes on to do, though, is to create a possible upgrade process. It also creates Clark, you just mentioned a review process with the planning board for when these things are proposed. We don't have that right now. This will create that, but it does have an upgrade thing that could possibly fall on someone, and that someone will be the person who is adding a new house, not rebuilding an existing one, adding a new house to a way that is deemed inadequate in the first instance by the building inspector or by the planning board on review and appeal. So that's it. And it's because why this is important for us to do is because, again, by a change that was made in the late 60s to get away from subdivisions and get into smaller frontage and pork chop lots and long driveways, we made certain decisions about development. And now today in 2021, we are seeing the leftovers and the harder back pieces of land that want to be developed. And we have and we are finding that in some of those cases, as we've mentioned a few cases already, that the ways that are serving them are not adequate for the added usage of new houses on them. So this is to say what you will do. But if you are deemed to be on an inadequate way, and you are adding a new house and new usage, new intensity of usage, yes, you may be facing an upgrade.
But Tom, you're talking about the bylaw that didn't pass. You're not talking about your access regulations. Are you
I am
putting,
exactly
are you
talking about
putting
the
this
access.
in the access regulations?
And Tom,
I'm just asking a question.
I want to
I
make
don't know what he's talking about. Is he talking about?
I
his
am
access
talking about the
regulations,
regulation,
or is
Clark,
he
and I
talking
made
about the
that very
bylaw that didn't pass?
the bylaw that didn't pass was simply a set of definitions. It had no substance to design, construction, dimensions of any of these roads. You did a great job obfuscating that the other night, but I have been talking.
You don't have to be rude about it, Tom.
I want to stop this. I want to stop this and ask us to go through the language of the regulations line by line. And I want to see us identify what is the debate here. So
let me do this.
will you lead us through that
Yeah, no,
line by
well,
line?
let me ask, does everybody here have a copy of it in front of them?
Yeah. And this would be something be going forward in
And
spring.
then I know there's 11 comments here. I hope I answered Mr. Stevens, some of his. I know Mr. Sarchuk wants to speak, a couple of other people, but
I don't know
I don't
doing
know-
though.
I don't
I'm
know-
sorry.
This is, so what we're trying to do is to make it easier for us to do the job we have to do on a regular basis, which is to determine what the adequacy is of a way so that houses can be built upon it.
So
That is what
we have decided as a board to move forward with this.
we have the ability to make regulations. That's our job.
No, but we have to move
Right.
forward with, because I'm right now, I think both sides stink. I think that there's a lot of agendas in politics. And I would just as soon punt until the bylaws get rewritten. So I don't know what I go over line by line of bylaw that I've seen. I think everybody's really emotional, and I don't see any impartiality here anymore. So I'm just going to let it go through the regular process.
Eric,
Eric,
we're going to have in the next 2 months, 3 projects that have the conditions that we will have problems with.
That's fine. We haven't had zoning bylaws rewritten for 35 years. If 3 more projects happen,
again.
I mean, it's a mess.
Stop conflating this with the bylaw. As I've explained before, and I'll explain a 3rd or 4th time, the regulation is not the bylaw. It's not tied to the bylaw that was presented on Monday night. It is a regulation we could use now under our current bylaw as written. It is a regulation we need now under our current bylaw as written. I do not expect to vote tonight. But if it will help the members of the public and the members of the board, I can briefly go through its sections and just summarize it. We can continue this for another night's discussion. And at that time, the public will have a better sense of it and can make more meaningful questions and comments. And that's, I don't mind hearing from them tonight, but that's what I'd suggest. Let me just quickly go through it. I'm not expecting a vote. Okay?
Tom, I think Jack, before you do that, had his hand up. Jack, did you have your hand up?
I spoke earlier.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I just want to say,
Can we put it up on the screen before I do this though? But anyway, yeah, I'm sorry, Amy.
I was just looking to see if there was. Okay, so the public is asking for us to actually go through it. So let's go ahead and do this.
Then let me do that, but for the public's benefit, if we could put it up on the screen. I'm going to read from my version because it's always so small on the screen. But just if you could put up the version that doesn't, yeah, not
Not the red line?
not the red line one.
Okay.
My comments will come forward anyway, but it's kind of irrelevant at this point.
Okay, this is the non-red line version.
So, all right. So ladies and gentlemen, just for the members of the public, our common driveway regulations are when you print it out, 4 pages for just the common driveways, and the organization of this regulation follows the organization of that regulation. The first section is self-explanatory. It's the background and the purpose, similar to an introductory paragraph we have in the current regulation, the current common driveway regulation. And if we can go down to that first set of bullets, that's great. Those 5 bullets there are the reason for doing this. Those are the goals and objectives and the purpose of having these regulations. And it's all about.
Tom, would you please read these things so that people can hear them? I think it's better.
That's fine. All right. So the 5 purposes are: clarify the approved means of access to more than one residential lot, to promote the public welfare, protect public safety, and provide for adequate durability of the roadway, to provide for uniform and equitable procedure to administer review of adequacy of private ways, to provide for adequate access to a lot hereinafter proposed as the site of new dwellings or other habitable structures, and to respect and preserve insofar as possible in balancing the foregoing purpose, the unique characteristics of existing ways with different towns and different neighborhoods in town. So, you know, and on the issue of adequacy, everybody has to remember, because I know that there's been public statements made in other board hearings that, well, it's all about the speed of cars going down. Well, it's not just the speed, it's the volume, particularly if you are adding volumes of vehicles to a road. And it's the safety of our public safety vehicles to be able to get to your house in an emergency, or your utility vehicles to get to your house to service your utility needs. So adequacy is more than just, you know, how fast somebody can drive down the road. And it's also an issue of durability, you know, to make sure the road is going to last some time. Now, this next section 2 is explaining to what this applies. And
Read it, please.
yeah, well, I'll say there are 3 ways that you access a residential lot in this community. First is a street that is privately owned, and you know, again, another point of obfuscation was the public versus private and how many private roads we have in town. The town's policy on what to make public and what to keep private is a completely separate issue. And maybe that issue someday needs to be addressed with the selectmen, that maybe we should take more roads in this town, such as my own, which is private, but it is built to a subdivision standard and could be taken. It's maintained by the town.
Let's not.
But anyway, that's a different issue.
Let's not editorialize. Just let's go through
So the fact of the matter is, we do have a lot of private roads that are not created under the subdivision control law, and that is one way you get to property. Second way is the common driveway. And the third way is a road that's actually built under the auspices of the subdivision control law. That is regulated by a whole separate part of our bylaw, chapter 325, that's referenced there. So this regulation is to deal with the other 2 means of access, common driveways and non-subdivision private streets. If we could scroll down. All right, here is the first thing, is the dimensional criteria. Now, once again, under current regulations, we only regulate common driveways. We do not regulate the non-subdivision street. That is what we are adding here. And we originally got some dimensional and construction requirements from the town of Plymouth's bylaw, but in discussions with our public works director, Brian, and his last name is escaping me. Joyce, I apologize. He basically suggested to us, for the benefit of his department, to make these uniform, to make the construction requirements uniform between the 2. So again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, we have a graduated increase in the amount of pavement required, the maximum length that is allowed, and then, of course, the subdivision control law is the 3rd step above these 2. The dimensional requirements for a non-subdivision street, again, it's new because we don't have it at the moment. Common driveway, what we're changing is, instead of what we currently have, which is dimensional requirements, we have 3 levels of dimensional requirements depending on how many lots are to be served. The first major change is the number of lots to be served, which is currently as high as 8, and which the consensus of the zoning working group, or the unanimous of the zoning working group, is that that's too much. It is too close to the requirements of a subdivision for that many houses to be served. And it should, and so therefore the road should be built to a bigger and better standard. We did research of numerous communities around the Commonwealth. Our upper limitation of 8 houses that can be served is an outlier. We have found that we are an outlier in many respects of our zoning bylaw. And this is one of them. So we are proposing here to go to what is the mean, the pretty much standard limit on common driveways is 3 lots. And then with that, with 3 lots, you would put in a limitation on its length. Currently, it's 750 feet, which we now have adopted for the non-subdivision street. We're suggesting for a common driveway. And again, understanding that a driveway is a small, narrow road that shouldn't be serving a lot of properties, a 3-lot limit and a 350 foot length. Now, the next section, section 4, are the construction requirements. And these will be applicable to both the non-subdivision road and to the common driveway. Understanding that they each have different dimensions. And these
Please just read them so that everybody can stay online with you.
Well, with all due respect, Amy, we could be here all night if I read the whole bylaw word for word. I'm not going to go through the construction techniques, criteria, step by step, right? All I will say about them is that they were taken from construction criteria in our existing common driveway bylaw, not made up out of whole cloth. It is possible that Brian said do something, well, I know in the next section when it deals with drainage, Brian asked us to add some things. But we're creating a uniform construction criteria that is taken from our existing common driveway regulations. We go down to the next section. Okay, so the specification is civ percent passing. You'll see that right in our current common driveway regulations. Drainage. All right. We have, I will say this, we did, with Brian Joyce's help, flushed out more detail about drainage with reference now to the Conservation Commission, Chapter 223 of the town bylaws is the stormwater regs. When our common driveway regs were written, those didn't exist. Brian, with reference to the NPDES and municipal stormwater standards, these are the design criteria that our Public Works Department deals with the state. That's where that came from. So the roadway has construction criteria, it has certain drainage criteria, so we are not creating flood hazards. We heard, if you recall, at the corner of Brewster Road and 3A, there's a puddling problem there that turns into ice. Okay, so in the future, as we build these different kinds of roadways, they'll be designed to a standard that hopefully will not create any drainage problems and any puddling. All right, the next section is an important one, and that's where the real substance begins here. We do not presently have a process to review formally the adequacy of a way, a private way or a common driveway, and the next section is trying to put that in. And an important the number A there is saying that no zoning relief may be granted, no building permit shall be issued for a new dwelling. And I want to emphasize new because that's what this applies to. Until there's a determination that the proposed access to that new dwelling is adequate. Subsection B is the presumptions that we are placing here for what is adequate and what is not adequate. And adequacy will be presumed if a way, either the common driveway or the non-subdivision road, meets those design and dimensional criteria. If they do not, so if you could go a little further, the inadequacy, if they are inadequate, okay, they will either continue as grandfathered, be required to be upgraded, or may be subject to a waiver. So let me explain those. Nothing in this regulation is intended to make anyone's existing common driveway or private non-subdivision road, be upgraded. It will be grandfathered as long as you are not proposing a new dwelling on it, meaning complete new construction. If you're doing a tear down of an existing house, well, obviously there was a house there before and it's the same number of houses it's going to be there after. That's not considered adding a new dwelling. Okay. And then so then now we get into the adequacy in the process of how do we determine that if adequacy is brought into question. This first bullet under C was actually suggested by Clark at one point during the public hearing process. And it was for us to, the planning board is supposed to maintain a list of all the streets and ways in town. It would be for us to go through that list and make predeterminations that a road is adequate. And that's fine to put that in. I don't ever think we'll have the time to do it, but, and it's only as good as the conditions that existed on the day we do it. Because again, if somebody, a way today may be considered adequate, but if somebody were to add a new house to it, it may become inadequate. So this first bullet process is fine, but it's only going to be as good as the day the decision is made. We will make, second bullet, we will make a determination of adequacy for A&Rs. That's what we do now. That's part of our job. The third bullet is that we will be looking at the issue of adequacy in non-A&R settings. We could just go down a little bit to the next page, Lauren. And that first determination will be made by the building inspector. So if I could, I'll say we have a road, the application is for a new house on a private road. It is not an A&R application, it is just a straight building permit. And the question will be that the building inspector will have to make a determination if that road is adequate. And I'll use, you know, there was a new house built off my street up along a driveway. So we'll use that as an example. That house was not an A&R project. It was just a new house being added to my street. And so the building inspector in that situation would have been asked to say, is Hillside Drive adequate? And the building inspector will make that determination. He will report that to the planning board and to the public safety and public works department, because they're the two departments most concerned about the adequacy and safety. And then if there's any objection to the building inspector's determination of adequacy, there'll be a hearing in front of the planning board on that subject. Okay, so the planning board is going to be determining adequacy in the context of an A&R, as we already do. The planning board may be asked to determine adequacy in a non-A&R setting if somebody disputes the initial determination of adequacy made by the building inspector. Go down a little further. All right, so then section D, subsection D. This is getting to the heart of this, that if there's an increase in the number of dwellings to be served, shall require an upgrade if it is found to be inadequate. So again, where this will apply to people is not by anybody who's here now. It's going to apply to anyone who is adding a new structure to what is deemed an inadequate way. And again, there'll be a public hearing process and a process to determine that adequacy. And then if an upgrade is required, what goes on further is that the person who's causing the need for the upgrade, i.e. the builder of the new house, is going to have to do the upgrade. So, you know, we're talking on the zoning working group about linkage and, you know, public amenities, new things get built in the village. Should the developer also have to pay for new sidewalks off-site or new parking off-site? But, you know, this is somewhat related to that in the sense that if you were coming in and making the change, that is going to put stresses on town infrastructure, you are the one who's going to have to upgrade the change. And that is the principle of subsection D. So only new dwellings being built, only if the array is deemed to be inadequate to take the burden of the additional house, then an upgrade would be required to the construction standards that go on earlier. Go further. All right, and then that top paragraph is if we are doing an upgrade, we will treat it much in the same way we do with a subdivision. You know, we had today with the heritage estates and questions about a lot release, and you know, there's a bond on that, and it'll be a somewhat similar process here, that if there's going to need to be a substantial upgrade to a way, there should likely be a performance bond, so that just like with subdivisions, if somebody, a developer was to go belly up, the town isn't holding the bag. There'd be a bond to then go ahead and complete the road. Again, a requirement we already have built into the subdivision control law. Section 6 talks about zoning, and this is where we are tying into the state law of Chapter 41, Section 81M, and what the case law says. And there was a comment earlier about the SJC. There isn't, Clark, I wish there was, but there's no singular SJC decision on this subject or many other subjects related to land use. You have to piece together an awful lot of cases to come up with the standards. But amongst those cases, there is the concept of frontage being adequate and not illusory. And those concepts of state law are just being reflected in this part of the regulation here. Connection, the subsection B, connection of a private street or common driveway to another private street or common driveway is prohibited unless it's part of an approved subdivision. That comes from our subdivision control law, because we do not allow subdivision control roads to be attached to private ways. Subsection C is to deal with the concept of the ancient way. There are many people who will argue that paper streets that go back to plans that are decades or 100+ years old, or ancient ways, cart paths, things of that sort, are somehow adequate because they've existed for long. This is a policy decision to say that the town of Cohasset would not accept an ancient way as automatically. It says does not predetermine its adequacy. So however old a particular way is, it is still going to have to go through this modern standard of adequacy. The next is the application process for the issue when we have determinations, including the ability for us to get a fee for a peer review, as we do in so many other cases. So that's the regulation. And it is the term street/way that is referred to, that is from the new definitions, but that can easily be turned back to our current definition, which is simply street. But this can apply to our current bylaw, can apply to our current definitions. And again, it is an intent to set standards for the roadways we are building, insofar as what we see in most development these days is, you know, the leftover backland that wasn't developed earlier on in some phase of Cohasset's history. We are being challenged by this on this board regularly, and that's what this would try to fill the gap by giving us some measurable, objective standard of how to determine adequacy. Because if we, you know, the regulation is helping us, and it is specific to Cohasset. It is our regulation. The state law tells us we have to make determinations of adequacy, and we have a zillion cases that in given situations tells us what was adequate, what was not. But the state law doesn't tell us design criteria. It doesn't give us dimensional regulations. It simply doesn't. And that's what this regulation would apply. Written in Cohasset, for Cohasset, to determine the future of Cohasset properties.
All right, thank you, Mr. Callahan, for going through this in detail. We have a couple of comments here from members of the public. One question is from a person named Mike. You mentioned a few common driveways coming up on your agenda that have ambiguity with our bylaws. What exactly is the difficulty with these projects related to our current bylaw? Would a change in our bylaw stop these projects? In the cases that we've referred to, some of them are active, some of them are not active. In the cases where we have had most recent involvement, the issue was whether or not the road that was being, the development that was being proposed was being laid out on a private way, and the private way was not connected to a public way. That was the last case that we dealt with. Other cases that we've dealt with have to do with the adequacy of the lane. So for example, the dimensions are 10 feet and the road bed is completely inadequate. And those are the kinds of issues that we deal with on a regular basis.
If I may take a crack, I think that's Mr. Stevens who's making these comments. I think I saw his name was Mike Stevens. One answer to your question is, can we pass a bylaw that would stop the development? Other than unless we engaged in taking property by turning it into open space. No, the zoning laws of the Commonwealth, I've always said, they don't stop development. They can't be used to stop development. They can be used to condition it. The properties in towns where we're facing A&Rs, which is a form of subdivision, it is a less intense permitting form of subdivision. Those will still happen. People have their rights to pursue those. But in deciding to allow that or not allow it to happen, we have to make a decision whether a road is adequate and the frontage is adequate and the frontage is not illusory. And like I said, the state law and the state case law is giving us guidance in given situations, and maybe your situation falls into one of those clear case guidelines, and maybe it doesn't. But what this regulation is trying to do is we're saying an adequate road is a road that is going to meet these dimensional and design criteria. And it's giving us at least one objective standard into what is otherwise a fairly subjective standard of what is adequate. So that's what this regulation helps us to do. And so in a case when we find the current condition being a 10-foot wide strip of just blacktop thrown over the dirt, is that going to be adequate for the number of cars and houses being served? Is that going to be adequate for the fire department? We're in this regulation by setting these design criteria is saying, no, it isn't. We need, a certain substrate of the road to be built. We need a certain amount of asphalt. We need a certain curvature for drainage purposes, and we need a certain width for the safety of the vehicles that are going to use it. That's what we're lacking right now, and that would help us immensely to make these determinations in something less than a 100% subjective manner. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Stevens. Anybody else, any of the other comments?
There's one comment here from Mr. Jeffers. I do not think the board should wait for the bylaw project. The board needs to continue making decisions while the projects go on. The best case scenario is phase 1 of the bylaw project and 15 months away. However, the bylaw committee members could resign, causing delay, or it could get voted down or indefinitely postponed. Therefore, I do not think the board can wait for something that could be many, many years away and should move forward with making a decision one way or another on this regulation. Mr. Grady.
I actually agree with Mr. Jeffers, and I disagree with the number of people saying there's agendas and things like that going on here. I think if there's an agenda, and I hope that all planning board members concur, that it's to protect Cohasset, to protect the citizens, protect the properties, not to rearrange them, but just to establish guidelines and firm it up. No one's denying anything. And I don't understand why we're kicking the can down the road. We consistently kick the can down the road. And, you know, Mr. Jeffers has a hell of a good point that this is something that helps. And that's what we're here for. So I find we spend a lot of time, spin a lot of wheels, and waste a lot of time by doing just that, kicking it down the road, waiting for another moment. But I don't think there's any agendas per se, as has been mentioned here, right around. There may be some opinions. If there's agendas, those people should either recuse themselves or do something different. But I'm not accusing anybody of having an agenda, maybe a difference of opinion. But again, I want to emphasize, I agree with Mr. Jeffers. I think we should take it to a vote. Are we always going to be in sync? Nope. But that's what's, I'm going to say, that's a democracy. And that's my thought on that. But I think the planning board agenda is to protect the town, or we wouldn't be here because we didn't care, and protect the citizens. And just to maybe not tighten up the guidelines, but have some guidelines in place that they can utilize.
Can I, go ahead, Lynn.
Wait a minute, Tom.
Yep.
Sorry, I just wanted to notify you that in terms of public comment, Wayne Sawchuk would also like to address the board when you're ready.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Sawchuk.
Go ahead. Is he going to do it typing, or is he coming on the screen?
No, he's in a picture.
Is he?
Thank you. I'd like to have, I have a couple of questions, and I guess I've heard, I'm thankful that I've heard some of the explanations, but I really think that there has to be more reasoning. For instance, the 350-foot limit for a common driveway and the 3 common driveway houses maximum don't make sense to me. The first common driveway that I think it's been ever done with the current standards was the one on Norman Todd Road, and it actually serves 5 lots. But the common driveway itself is 325 feet long, and the houses are beyond that. Now, when you look at it and you see it, and it's basically at 350 feet is the length of a football field from goalpost to goalpost. You're not even, you're not even off the road in 350 feet. So I think that really should be 750 also. Or there has to be something that says, okay, the last house can't be more than 750 feet, or the first house can't be any closer than a particular thing. So I think that dimensional thing is just not right. And I think the 3 should have the ability to be more if there's the reason for having it more. On Norman Todd Road, that's something that the Cohasset Land Foundation put together and was responsible for, and I think did a fabulous job. One of those lots is a 5.5 acre parcel being used that can be used by the town. It's owned by the town. The other parcel was 6 acres that went to the Vendanta Center. So that was a circumstance that only 3 houses were built on it. But I was pleased that in that particular instance, the roadway was a 2-lane roadway, so that if the town uses it for a school or anything else, they've got adequate way to get in and out. And it was built by the standards, so it does have underground power and everything else. So in that circumstance, the houses wouldn't meet it, but the whole project would be positive. So that I really think that the 350 should be moved to 750, and the 3 should not be limited to 3, because there will never be a 3-lot subdivision on a common way. It'll be absolutely 3 individual lots. And do we want to have 3 curb cuts on the street with 3 700-foot, 500-foot, 200-foot driveways going in? Because frankly, what you've done for qualifications is to have them build a street without calling it a street to serve traffic going in 2 directions, and which is only going to increase speed also.
Can I, do you want me to wait for all of them, or do it one by one with your comments?
I don't know. I mean, you're gonna,
How many do you have?
I mean, I'm trying to say something that will be heard by all members of the planning board and have you consider individually what you think is the length that this should be. And I'll tell you, I've been here 75 years. I've been involved in a lot of different properties, but I have been absolutely 100% for the town. And I'm not looking, I have property that I could have sold 10 times over, and I didn't want to do the projects that were proposed. So I'm one that actually has the town as it's my best interest. So Tom, if you want to answer it, or
Well,
some
yeah,
more why.
I'm familiar with the new development, with the Land Foundation. I was part of that too, and it's across the street from my first house in town. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're telling me it's 325 feet with 3 houses, so it complies with these regulations. Our existing, but all right, so our existing, as I tried to say before, our existing common driveway regulations allow for up to 8 houses and up to 750 feet in length. Again, I'm not suggesting we should vote tonight, maybe continue this, but the zoning working group has the data we got from various other towns that shows that that is an outlier statistic. That both the 750 feet is an outlier and the 8 lots is certainly an outlier.
Okay.
The 3 and 350 is going towards a median point of what you see for common driveway regulations. And again, in other communities, then they are making a graduated step up to regulate that roadway that is more than a driveway, but not a subdivision road. That's a gap that we have in our bylaw and our regulations at the moment. So that we're trying to add that in. So it's a graduated step up. Now, with that property in particular, that access road, whatever you call it, maybe call it a common driveway. Yeah, they built that to a very high standard. They did. Voluntary. They weren't compelled to do that because we didn't have these types of criteria. It is more modern that a lot of the construction criteria about that it had a substrate and the kind of thickness of pavement and the curvature, that all complied with our current regulations, because that was, again, it's fairly new, and these regulations that we have today were already in place. But the thinking is if that project, like let's say there wasn't the public aspect of the land and there was more than 3 houses there, the thinking is that has to comply with some higher standard than just a common driveway. And it should be something different because there's more intense use. And again, we were looking at being in line with what other communities are doing. And it's in this area and a couple of other areas that we're discussing on the working group. Cohasset is an outlier in some really weird stuff that we had that's different from everybody else. And we're not so sure it's serving us. Now, you mentioned about the 3 driveways coming down to the street. So that's a little bit of a different discussion. Because again, what happened in, like my street was developed, I think in the late 60s. My house is 1970. At some point, I think it was 1969, we used to have suburban frontage. We had frontages of over 100 feet. And as a result, in the 60s, what did we get? We got my cul-de-sac, Fairrow Plain, Riverview Drive. We got traditional subdivision cul-de-sacs built to subdivision standards. Well, we made a decision in 1969 to switch to 50-foot frontage, which only cities have. Suburban towns do not have that. And as a consequence, our development pattern changed from cul-de-sac subdivisions to pork chop lots with, instead of every house having a driveway go out, the building of common driveways or something less than a subdivision road to serve clusters of anywhere from 3 to 8 lots. That is a debate that when we look at the table of dimensional regulations in Article 5, that is another discussion. Do we go back to traditional suburban frontages and zoning and encourage subdivision development, or do we stay where we are and encourage smaller frontage and pork chop development? pork chop lot development.
We're getting off the subject.
No,
of-
no, but then if we are in our current pattern of using the 50-foot frontage, the thinking goes that the ways, if we're going to encourage use of something less than a subdivision road, we think for the purpose of safety and adequacy, it should be built to a certain standard. And that's part of the driving force behind this.
All right, thank you.
I doubt that you could come up with any examples, maybe any examples of accidents on common driveways today. And it is up to the fire department to determine whether or not they can get a fire truck down there. And I don't think there has been any losses in the last 74 years on common driveways of houses burning down. So,
Mr. Sawchuk, there
Yes.
are examples around town where whatever the rules were, they were not complied with. And now we have circumstances which are not safe. We're lucky we don't have accidents, but that isn't a reason for not trying to comply with the standard. I want to go to Mr.
Well, I just want to add on that point, and again, just to repeat myself, the design construction standards are in our existing common driveway regulations.
okay.
That's
Listen,
what they can-
one has taken almost all my time. So I have one other thing, and that is the maximum grade of no more than 6%, which is just a little bit more than a handicap ramp access. I think that is an undoable situation on a pre-existing substandard development that you want to bring up to current codes. So I
have
think that's great.
yeah, all right, and I understand, and actually in the,
And thank you for letting me speak.
no, thank you, Wayne, and
Okay, I'll put the rest of my ideas in writing so that I can get them to you. And you'll be able to review
We
this.
appreciate that.
But I will answer that one specifically. The Plymouth bylaw that we borrowed that part of it from, the standards for the non-subdivision road, I believe had a 10% grade in it. And the original draft copied that 10% grade. And it was pointed out to me that our subdivision control regs under chapter 325 of the bylaws applies a 6% grade in our subdivision control regs. So the thinking was to change this to 6 for consistency's sake.
But you're
Whether
dealing
it
with
should-
totally
whether-
different property where the existing layers of land are not suitable for that. And you would want to carry the contour of the land going through. So I think that if you're building a subdivision, you want to build only subdivisions. You can put bulldozers, you can move the ground and everything else. I'm
Right.
talking about keeping the character of the town.
I understand that.
Nice things
Right.
going between the
I
trees.
understand that, and I'll
Thank
also
you very
emphasize,
much.
I'll just point out again the waiver of capability that is in this regulation. The applicants come to us asking for waivers when we can't grant them. That happened recently in some project. There's very few places in the bylaw where we can grant a waiver, and we built in a waiver process here for just the situation you're talking about.
All right, thank you. So we just lost our last question. It seems to me that we've reviewed the documentation. I think it's pretty clear to everybody on the board what it says. I think it's also, I hope, clearer for the public to understand not just what it is, but the rationale behind it, the research behind it, and really the intent, which is for both maintaining the character of Cohasset and also for the future improving and ensuring security. So at this point, I'm not sure we have much more to say, and I would ask that somebody make a recommendation that we continue this discussion.
I'd just like to make a suggestion. Just give me 30 seconds.
You dropped it, it went away, it's
What?
fine, okay?
Eric, I think you just.
What? I think that what would be really great is I did some research on low impact site design and that the MAPC had, and the CTPS or whatever the hell, the citizens trainer planning thing, also have some really great guidelines for just what we're talking about, common driveways and subdivisions, where the standards have been made more flexible in some ways. And I think what Cohasset needs essentially is flexibility in any regulation like this that we want to pass as a planning board. But what I think makes sense to do is to take Tom's regulations in hand and the current common driveway regulations and take a look at some real world examples, just test cases. What has been done with common driveways in the last 10 or 20 years? And then a couple of examples of ways that predate zoning that aren't built to subdivision standards, and how what is standards, how they would how they could possibly work. And I think that would be useful for everybody on the planning board to as an exercise to work through any of the details of these regulations.
All right, thank you. Mr. Creighton?
Yeah, thank you. Just a little perspective when we talk about regulations. I've been on both sides of this over a fairly long career, and a lot of variety in Boston, Fenway Park, and all this stuff. It's important to understand, and also in conservation. When I was chair of conservation, we were not enforcing environmental standards, if you will. What we were doing, and what this laws will do, is establish understandable rules and regulations that if you apply and if you meet those, you could do what you want to do. The important thing about these types of regulations is to take away a lot of the arbitrary decision makings where people on boards and commissions sometimes might have their own agendas, and they cannot inflict those agendas on the people, on the property owners. And so when property owners get a little concerned, I think it's helpful to take a step back and understand, now you know what you have to do. And if you do that, you can use your property. So that's a very, very important thing in any discussion.
New people in and
Whoa. I guess I'm done, and thank you all. This planning board is working very hard, and I think we, the town, owes you a debt of gratitude.
All right, so it's 9:07.
Can I just ask if Carolyn has anything perhaps to add that, you know, particularly we've discussed the distinction between a bylaw and a regulation. And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't know if you have anything that might be helpful to us, but as far as the future goes, we're meeting the 5th, correct?
That is correct.
I would almost suggest
Right now, right,
well,
Lauren?
anyway, all right, never mind.
It's-
Yeah, let's see. If
It's a very busy agenda.
So Carolyn?
I do have some language suggestions to make, but I think it would be easier to distribute those and share with the board as opposed to going through here. Some of it is really just cleaning up a little bit. But the difference between a bylaw versus a regulation, this is not a bylaw. This is not a bylaw that you're discussing tonight. This is purely a regulation that is supposed to be, you know, the bylaw gives you sort of a general roadmap. The regulation is supposed to give you more detail, and both get applied by the planning board. But, you know, obviously the regulation doesn't go to town meeting versus the bylaw does. The regulation gives you a little bit more flexibility in that it's generally easier to amend a regulation because you only have to get through the planning board. You don't have to go through the entire town meeting and get a 2/3 vote. But also it's a little bit easier to amend a regulation. So if something doesn't seem to be working for you, as it sounds like, at least for some of the comments this evening, that some of your existing regulations have not helped you address some of the situations that you have faced. So this would help establish certain design and dimensional criteria that might help you with some of those future situations.
Thank you. I'd like to say out to the board, if we have a busy agenda on the 5th.
Let's let Lauren, can you give us a sort of a sense of what we have planned for the 5th of January?
Yes, on January 5th, you'll have to make your RFQ committee appointments for the zoning area, like we talked about earlier. We have 26 Lambert's Lane coming in for its 2 applications. One is an A&R to divide the lot, and one is a common drive application. We have a preliminary subdivision filing for 36 Cedar Lane, as well as another preliminary subdivision filing for 90 Black Horse Lane. And then we have the continuation of the site plan review for 12 Parking Way and the continuation of the site plan review for 390 CJC Highway.
Oh, it's pretty full.
Well, may I make a
Yes.
suggestion? And it's a 2-part suggestion. One is to continue this to the 12th and just dedicate that night to this. But Clark, you also mentioned in your speech about Article 7 the other night, the need for regulations. And I think perhaps that same night, I would like to, we've made 2 amendments to Article 11 of the bylaw, the earth removal bylaw.
I use the word criteria.
Well, whatever we use, I don't believe either one of those changes need regulation, but I wouldn't. My thought here was to set aside a night, deal with this particular regulation, the continuation of a public hearing, but also if you think the new Article 11 needs regulations, I would invite you to suggest some, and we can start discussing it that night. But that's if everybody's good with meeting on the 12th. But I would just leave it for those 2 items and not let other things cloud our agenda on the 12th.
So let's ask Miss Linda if that's even possible.
So I'm really hesitant to add another meeting, just knowing the high volume of meetings that we have, and we do have space for this on the agenda on the 26th of January.
Yeah, I think that's a better.
At the moment we do. At the moment we do, but that's.
Right. Well, if we log it in for the 26th, at least we will have a space.
All right.
And I would say that we have the holidays. There's a lot of things going on.
Motion to continue to the 26th.
Just a minute, please. I'd like to see Eric has put his hand up and down a couple.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that what I'm going to be looking for is with these regulations. I understand the distinction that's being made, but I want to know, as Sawchuck brought up, is it 750 feet that's reasonable here in Cohasset, or is it 350 square feet? Where do we come up with the rules and regulations outside of looking at other neighboring towns and what the standard is, and how does it apply to topography and the ways in roads here in Cohasset? Is it 3? Is 3 too little? Is the number 5? Is 6% too low a grade? Should it be 10%? I'd like to get be able to substantiate how does it affect Cohasset outside of, well, it just brings us closer to what the standard is. That'll help me make a decision on whether or not the regulations are something that makes sense, or are we just picking regulations that are in line with other communities with regards to this particular bylaw.
At least to the 6%, it's already in the subdivision control regulation that we have. So we would be opening up that and asking that question across that. I'm just making that point. Mr. Grady?
Nothing, forget it. I'm just kind of disgusted by the whole process. So why don't we just kick it down the road a little further? And I'll go with that, whatever.
Right. What did you say, Tom?
No, I appreciate Paul's comment, but
You heard it from one of the citizens alone. I'm sure there's a number of the other ones. Just the thing. Again, it's another case. So we add another meeting in the holiday season. We add another 4 hours to these meetings when something we could have got done tonight that's relatively simple, that was not going to have a huge causal effect, that would have tightened up some guidelines. That's about it. And we just can't get it done. Instead, we waste 2.5 hours doing this.
Well, in the end,
So there's your process.
well, we do have an obligation to vet this for the public, and the Zoom, with due respect to everybody's comments about it, the Zoom forum isn't the best way. But we're not doing anything wrong either, and to people who are implying that we are somehow doing something underhanded here, that's not right either. So this is not the zoning working group. They are just working on bylaws, not regulations. This is us. We're the ones responsible for this.
Sure.
I hear you, Paul, and, you know, look, we're going to have a common driveway application coming to us on the 5th. It would be nice to have new rules in place, but
we don't have.
I don't have a problem going back to having one more go around with public comment.
Okay, so let's do two things. One is if Carolyn will give us the comments that she has, that can be a help to us. Lauren, would you like to say something?
Yes, just to clarify, the common drive application that we have, that the timing of filing predated this, even if you had made a decision tonight anyway, so our existing standards would have held for that. That's upcoming on the 5th.
Yep, okay. I would have
So
assumed that.
I think I heard a motion to continue.
Second.
It'd be January 26th at 6:30 PM. You didn't say a time earlier.
Right, thank you. I didn't have one at 6:30 PM. All right. I'm completely bleary-eyed. Can I get a roll call vote?
Clark Brewer, aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Eric Potter.
Aye.
Tom Callahan.
Aye.
Paul Grady.
Nay.
All right, thank you. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Everybody, before we go, have a great holiday season, and we will see each other at the beginning of the new year. Everybody be safe. We're going to close it now. Clark Brewer.
Clark Brewer, aye.
Eric Potter.
Aye.
Paul Grady.
Aye.
Tom Callahan.
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the long evening.
Thanks,
Very good.
everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Good work, planning board. Good work. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.